Friends, if you are someone who has any interest in the United Methodist Church's General Conference, then this might be of interest to you. Just today, a short time ago, the General Conference, the Commission on General Conference, issued an update, and here's what it said. As you remember, we were supposed to have a General Conference in our denomination. By the way, we're a global denomination, so United States, Africa, Europe, the Philippines, delegates from all of those countries, about 850 or so. I don't know the exact number, but it's like that. And we're supposed to do it in 2020, but you remember, there was a pandemic. And then there was a continuation of the pandemic. And now we've all been expecting to go in 2022. That's not going to happen. And what they've said is it's going to happen in 2024. So this is sort of big news for the day that is going to be postponed. And here's why. This is the United Methodist Church's Book of Discipline. This is the one that was done in 2016. This book governs United Methodist churches all across the globe. At any general conference, material in this can be changed, it can be added to, or it can be deleted. Now, you may remember in 2019, there was a big general conference in our church that was dealing with the issue of LGBTQ inclusion or exclusion. And there was a one church plan that was presented that would have allowed different people to do different things. The two presenting issues were same-gender marriage and the ordination of gay people. Would we allow those two things, which in the past we have not? This has been a long-standing conversation, debate, and even argument since the 1970s. I mean, this is a long-term thing. Now remember, when we gather, we're not just in the U.S. We have delegates from Africa, the Philippines, Asia, and Europe. And in all those different cultures, there are different views on homosexuality. And so this is more like the United Nations and less like the U.S. Congress in that sense. So it's complicated. Well, in 2019, a group of people that you could call incompatibilist here in the United States, they're folks who feel that if any pastor does a same-gender marriage, they want out. If any annual conference would ordain a gay individual, they want out. That's how strongly they feel. They're incompatible with those practices. And so they wrote something called the Traditional Plan. And the Traditional Plan didn't just reinforce what was in the 2016 Book of Discipline, it actually made it far harder and far worse. Clergy who do same-gender marriage, they get one warning, they're suspended. It's not even a warning, they're suspended on the first time. If they do a second one, their credentials are taken. There are just a lot of penalties for anybody who breaks a rule, and that's because the people that wrote it are incompatibilists. They believe everybody should do the same thing or you should get out of the church. Well, anyway, a lot of folks were hoping for this 2024 General Conference because it turns out the incompatibilists weren't just frustrated about LGBTQ inclusion as a possibility. They were frustrated about a lot of things, and I'll leave it to them to tell their story and what they're frustrated about. But the point is, they were hoping that we could hold this General Conference and there would be some legislation passed called the Protocol, and it would allow them to easily move out of the United Methodist Church to, it's called disaffiliate, and leave and start their own denomination. So here's something that I want you to know. The General Conference, the Commission on General Conference, before it said, you know, what are we going to do here? They thought about maybe doing it electronically. But what they decided is it couldn't be done electronically because we have multiple languages, multiple interpreters. We also have all these committees that have to meet for the legislation, and those committees then have a plenary session, and the plenary session then has to meet as a whole. And so they felt it was just way too complicated. This was not your average Zoom meeting, folks. So they didn't do it electronically. And then they said, well, what about 2024? Well, here's the reason. You had to have three things to do this in 2022. You have to have three things. You have to have vaccinations, visas, and then a negative COVID test before delegates from outside of the U.S. got on airplanes to come to the United States. Now, what the Commission finally figured out is this was the big stumbling block, visas. In fact, they contacted the U.S. State Department, and what they heard is, my goodness, in some countries, it's over an 800-day wait. And sometimes you have to have not just one interview, but two or even three interviews. Now, some of the more incompatibilist groups who really wanted to get on the United Methodist Church and they really wanted to have the General Conference in 2022 have said, well, we know people in the State Department and we could have worked all this out. What the Commission said is the high bar on this is we want an inclusive General Conference. We want those delegates from Africa to have their voice. We want those delegates from Europe. We want those delegates from Asia. And as a result, the standard here was too hard around visas. And as to people who say, I know people and they can work it out, I live 20 minutes from the nation's capital. Members of Floris United Methodist Church, where I serve, actually work for the State Department. And can I just tell you my perspective? If the U.S. State Department tells you that they can't produce the visas in time for your meeting, they're not going to wave a magic wand because you're a United Methodist. They've got a lot of people all over the world trying to get in the United States for different reasons, important reasons, and basically you wait your turn. And so if the State Department told the Commission that, I'm really confident that that is accurate and true. Am I happy about it? No. Do I have to live in a world that's been dramatically affected by a pandemic? Yes, I do. And so we might as well do that to the best of our ability and do it in a Christian way, which means we deal with it. It's not terrible news. Now, here's something that's really unclear. Is it postponed or is it canceled, this General Conference? Why does that matter? Well, let me show you this. This is all of the legislation that was coming to the 2022 General Conference. Actually, 2020 at the beginning. It's that thick. If you open this up, you'll see all these pages of legislation. If you're a delegate, you get to read all this. It's just so much fun. You can't even imagine. And so this legislation, if the meeting is postponed, will remain in place. Won't have to be resubmitted. In fact, it could be that more legislation could be submitted because it's been rescheduled to 2024. That's one possibility. I'm kind of hoping nobody writes anymore because there's already a lot. But if it's canceled, this will be thrown out, and all the people that wanted legislation and changes to that Book of Discipline will have to resubmit it, and it'll be made into new books like this. Now, here's why that is important. The Commission on General Conference really doesn't have the power to cancel a General Conference. They can postpone it. So that question is going to have to go to what's called the Judicial Council, which is like the Supreme Court for the United Methodist Church. They'll make the decision, is it postponed or canceled? But what about the incompatibilists, you ask? I mean, they want to start a new denomination called the GMC, the Global Methodist Church. And in this new denomination, they were hoping to allow churches and annual conferences to go, so they're going to start that, and they say they're going to start it in May. Here's the good news. If you're a person who wants to leave the United Methodist Church, there are 2 paragraphs that you can use already. You don't even need a General Conference. This legislation, 2553, was passed in 2019. If you don't like its provisions, go to 2548.2. That's already in that Book of Discipline. Now, you're going to need to talk to your district superintendent, to your bishop, and ultimately, if your church decides it wants to leave, it would have to be voted on the floor of your annual conference session. You know, there's been some writing recently that, people are being hard and difficult. Maybe there are some places, but all the bishops that I've spoken to, they just want people to sort of part with a blessing. They're not trying to hold you back. They're not trying to do anything. Everybody needs to figure out where they want to go. I want to stay in the United Methodist Church. I'm excited about our global church. And just today, before all this came out, I received a notification that there was a way that our church could help refugees in the Ukraine. And I am really excited. Our church is going to we're going to start with $5,000 to that effort because we want to help people in the Ukraine. And I am excited about a powerful United Methodist Church, a global denomination that already has churches in the Ukraine, and we can help our members and the people that are in that major crisis. Because quite frankly, while the Methodists are doing all this, the world's in need of help. The world needs Jesus. The world needs the blessing of aid and comfort and goodness that Christ teaches us to give. And so I'm excited to stay in a church that is focusing on the love of Christ and offering that to everyone. So thanks for joining me. Hope this helps, and I hope everything I said was right. Thanks.